Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today. And in this week's programme, we have a new Prime Minister in Liz Truss, and we'll be asking, is it mission impossible? Considering that she faces the biggest political challenges any leader has faced since Winston Churchill. And in today's programme, I'm joined by Melanie Simmons, the editor of Heart newspaper, together with the Reverend Mark Whedon from Living Word Ministry. So welcome to the programme. And Melanie, I'll start off with you, because in the natural, looking at the challenges that Liz Truss, our new Prime Minister, is facing, is not only a daunting task, it looks like it is mission impossible. But we know that with God's help and grace, nothing is impossible. But describe for us the challenges that she faces to get a grips with so many different issues and challenges facing our nation, because as a country, we're in dire straits.
Yes, well, I don't think there's any area apart from employment which you could look at and say things are going well. We do have low unemployment. That's a legacy of the Tory government for the last 12 years in theory. But everything else is presenting problems. You've got people all over the place wanting to go on strike. There's talk about making the train drivers become protected workers or something, so they can't go on strike. She's talking about being tough on the unions. I mean, there's been a lot of talk on the campaign trail, but when it comes to actually doing all this stuff and facing all these challenges, it's every department is actually going to have a massive job.
Absolutely. And Mark, Liz Truss has ruled out an early election, unlike her predecessors in Boris Johnson and Theresa May, who, after they became elected as leader of the Conservative Party and then the Prime Minister, they went to the country to gain their legitimacy. She's not going to do that, knowing that she's only got 2 years left. The Conservatives are not in a great electoral place to call for a general election, so she will hold out until election is called in 2022. But considering the challenges that she faces, and I think looking at the challenges that she faces, she can either do what the previous Prime Ministers have done, David Cameron and Theresa May and Boris to a certain extent, is to actually allow the agenda of the World Economic Forum and to pursue their policies, which has resulted in electoral catastrophe. If she does that, we know that she and our nation faces oblivion. But do you think that she will be able to stand up against that and govern in the best interests in the country instead of the interests of the globalists?
I think you're right, firstly, to have the title of Mission Impossible as a question, and I would describe it really as a poison chalice, because there are things that are there in the mix. It's not just strikes, but and the NHS and energy and the things that we know about like that. But her party is divided, and with those who want to bring her down. And 12 MPs apparently have already said they're going to be putting in letters of no confidence before Christmas about her leadership. And so to be able to govern in this way, and then there are those forces behind the scenes who are looking to bring in a globalist agenda, I think it's going to be extremely difficult. But I have a little bit of hope, partly because obviously the Lord himself, and in different ways, in Genesis and in Jeremiah and Jesus saying that the things that are impossible with men are possible with God. There's a little bit of character in her, I think, that where she can stick to her guns and she might be able to weather the storm. So I have that tiny little bit of hope that maybe she could do that in the interests of this country rather than that globalist agenda, because I think you're right, if there's a globalist agenda that's followed, we're finished as a nation.
And Melanie, I mean, the Financial Times have put it here, which is such an interesting quote that says, she may have one of the shortest political honeymoons in modern history. Now, one thing that is afforded to new political leaders and prime ministers is a honeymoon period whereby they are new, they're given a period of grace by the media, by the country, but saying this could be one of the shortest honeymoons in history, that she wouldn't have time really to get on with her agenda and have the support of the country. So the first few weeks of her premiership are absolutely vital, are they not?
You're saying that suddenly reminds me of when Jim Callaghan came and took over from Heath during the 1973, and there's all the the whole country was practically at a standstill, and we had the 3-day week, and he said, I'd come to do a job. So there was nothing afforded to him. It's slightly better for Liz Truss. She's only got the barristers and intermittent train drivers on strike, and other people talking about striking. But the country hasn't ground or halted. We haven't had power outages yet. We haven't had lots of businesses going to the wall yet, but this is what we're being promised by the media. And the media also talking constantly about the cost of living crisis. Well, I don't think it's really started to bite yet, though it has with some people, but not en masse, and certainly probably not amongst the Tory voters. So there will be a fair amount of goodwill which has propelled her into office, but the media, I think, won't let up because they're talking about the pressure to do something about the energy crisis.
Absolutely. And Mark, the Week publication put out 5 urgent questions facing Liz Truss as Prime Minister. I like these. So one is the cost of living. Help will UK households get? Number 2 is urgent foreign policy issues such as Ukraine, and she's believed to be more hawkish than Boris on Ukraine, and dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And of course, the other one is the Iranian nuclear problem. We also see that number 3 is the public sector crisis, and number 4 is to secure the UK energy supplies, and finally the last one is to unite the Conservative Party. I think all of these are mission impossible, because I don't know how she's going to do it, but we know that she works hard, she's very vigilant in her work that she does, and maybe she's the person that we need to lead the country this time.
Well, there's a lot of things there, and who would really want this job is my real question. Is she the person to lead the country at this time? I wonder if there is anybody. You need level-headedness, you need an ability to come back to core conservative principles, which the Conservative Party themselves do not seem to want. Yeah. And we see that with the majority of MPs really having backed Rishi Sunak all the way through, and Liz Truss is only squeezed in there. And as Christians, obviously, we come back to it's God who raises up leaders. But when you look at the party and the people involved, I'm not convinced we have the leader that we need, but we have somebody who does have some qualities, and I think it's paramount that God's people pray, really intercede, because we do believe that God is a prayer-answering God. So with all those 5 points, each one of them is so major in and of itself that could bring down any PM. And she's got them all together in a short space of time.
Absolutely. And as we're recording of this week, we're recording on Tuesday. This program's aired, as you're watching now, on a Thursday night. So there's a 2-day gap. But even the Conservatives, even behind the scenes, are already trying to prepare a successor to Liz Truss in Penny Mordaunt, with the headline title on Tuesday from the Daily Telegraph that they would like to see her as the new Deputy Prime Minister, in which she'll be waiting in the wings if Liz Truss slips up. And of course we know that she's a World Economic Forum plant, and she would be bad news for the Conservative Party, she'd be bad news for the country, and what is already in mission impossible would be mission disaster under her leadership, would it not?
Yes, it certainly would, because she is her voting record is not far from what we would like in terms of pro-life issues, and her pronouncements on gender. She's completely, certainly not traditional Tory, never mind traditional Christian, and it would be of great concern. And she was already criticised during the campaign by her then boss, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, for apparently not being in the office enough. So she kind of sprang from nowhere for the leadership campaign. I mean, she'd been in the wings. She had some good publicity about, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when, but then she suddenly reappeared. And I don't know what her, she hasn't even held one of the great offices of state. She's been number 2 or number 3 in the ministerial pecking order. I thought, she was Paymaster General, yes, but it would not bode well, and that's something else to pray about.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the biggest challenges, and maybe the hardest challenge of all, is possibly to unite the Conservative Party. Because this is do or die for them, isn't it?
Mission impossible.
Absolutely. So we face the prospect of she needs to unite the party. If not, the sniping continues, and of course then the Conservative Party would face an electoral disaster come the polls, and then we got the possibility of possibly a Lib Lab coalition, and that could change the whole political dynamics of our country forever.
Well, I think from the Conservative Party's point of view, this is their John Major moment. And of course, his premiership really took them into oblivion for what, 12, 15 odd years or so. And I think we are looking at the same thing. And I don't think that it would be fair to blame Liz Truss on that. This is the party that's brought this about. They brought down their leader. This is the fourth leader in the 12 years they've had, and some are counting it as 6 years, if you look at the tail end of David Cameron's leadership. So yes, there could easily be a coalition. I mean, I would hope and pray for a hung parliament, but I don't think we'd even get that. We'd have Starmer leading, which would be quite a troubling prospect.
And also, there seems to be, I mean, we don't know yet, as of this recording this programme, who exactly are going to be in the main offices of power, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor under her leadership. But one thing we've had over the last few decades, certainly since going back to before Margaret Thatcher was in power, is that all the major political parties, whether it's been the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or the Lib Dems with the Conservatives in a coalition government, have always governed with a kind of liberal ideology. So there's not really much separating any of the major political parties. But for the challenges facing this country, surely it's essential that she not only puts the right people with the most talented people in those positions, but also that she governs in the interest of our nation and does what's right for our nation, because we're already seeing that the light of democracy and freedom is going out across the world. We only have to look at Joe Biden's horrendous speech that he made in Philadelphia last week to realise the authoritarian nature of his speech and marginalising half of the US electorate by calling them extremists because they voted for President Trump. And we know that the majority of Trump's policies were kind of pro-life. They're Christian in value. We had Christian ministers of state in the US, and of course he also protected Israel. And so therefore, if America, which is the world's leading superpower, no longer a superpower anymore, but certainly the only light of power in the world to defend our Judean Christian heritage, and if the light goes out in the United States, then it means the light goes out everywhere. Is there a danger that if she does govern in the interests of our country, defends freedom, attacks all these major issues, she might find herself very isolated in the international community?
Well, there is that danger, although it'd be quite interesting to see what the new Italian Prime Minister is like. If it is this particular lady candidate who is head of a party which is being called far-right, I don't know, although she's made pro-EU pronouncements, but that might be a possible ally. As for her, yes, she could well find herself out on her own a bit, but having said that, if she brings the cabinet with her and she feels she's got the support, she won't feel isolated. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher went through years of that. She wanted to go to the EU and sort of tell them what was what. And I think Liz Truss might have the courage to do that. I am concerned, though, in terms of what she's already spoken about, which is defeating Russia. And she's also talked about a global NATO. Now, where does that idea come from? So, although we like the idea of Britain rules the waves, it's just not realism anymore. So that is a concern of mine.
And Mark, I suppose one thing comes to mind, which is an interesting thing when it comes to Liz Truss, is that she's already put out that she wants to be known as the educational Prime Minister, that she's going to put education at the forefront of her premiership, just like Tony Blair when he said it's education, education, education. And she knows that is the best way to enhance a kind of skill set for the next generation and help our nation with innovation. Now, the more bailouts there are for businesses and households because of the energy crisis, the less money there would be to actually fund a lot of these innovation projects. So the big question is, can she be the Prime Minister for Education?
Well, education is very, very important, but not in the Tony Blair sense when he wanted to push everybody into tertiary education. We have to recognise that people, children are different, and some of them will do better with trades and apprentices rather than a sort of formal school room education. And we need to get back to the basics. It's reading, writing, arithmetic, that people can do these things. I mean, if we look at where our nation's at, our flagship carrier broken down coming out of port. I mean, how are we going to defend ourselves anyway if we're threatened by whatever is out there? So education has to be looked at in the sense of what people are capable of, what their talents might be, and facilitate those. And so I think it's going to be a changing mindset that needs to take place.
Absolutely. And I suppose one big question that we have to ask in this programme, do you think our media will give her a fair go? Considering that the challenges that she faced, she needs the public on her side, she needs the media on her side, and the media are only too happy to snipe and trying to bring her down before she's even governed a month in office. So how important is it that she's able to bring the media on side, the public on side, and come up with a strategy and a plan and a vision that the country can unite behind?
It's extremely important, but she will have been thinking about that during this long 2-month campaign, and she'll probably have been drafting her cabinet from the moment she announced her candidacy, if not before. I should think there'll be plenty of notes on backs of envelopes. But by the time this programme is shown, we'll know who's in the cabinet, and we have to pray that she gets a strong team around and also a strong and helpful personal staff who will protect her media image and how she is perceived, because her image has actually changed significantly, and they're very canny these days about media images. But when she was a trade secretary, she was sort of wearing multicoloured clothes and thought fashion was fun, and now she's dressed much more soberly and got the much more sort of disciplined hair, and that's a la Hillary Clinton or whatever. But yes, to some extent, image is everything, but I think the media have a lot of goodwill towards her. I mean, let's not forget the press is, I'd say, 60% Tory supporting. Then
that's
you've
the
got
newspapers, isn't it? That's,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
Excluding the television.
Then you've got of course you've got the BBC, which is rabidly left wing, and is already slanting things to talk up the problems, and always does. So it shall just be interesting. I think also social media will play a part, but at the moment, I think she's got goodwill behind her.
Absolutely, and also the other factor we have to bring into account that it is God that places our leaders into positions of power and influence, and as Christians we have a responsibility to pray for them. How important is it that we actually pray for her and intercede for her, and pray that she will listen to God and be actually governed, even if she might not be so much aware of him. I know that she's very secular, so I don't know how much of a Christian education she's got, probably a small one. But how important is it that she recognises that God is sovereign and that she needs our help? So I mean, these challenges alone are absolutely massive, and the only way to actually confront them is actually with God's help. So it's imperative that we pray for them so that we may have a peaceful life and be able to have the opportunity to spread the gospel.
Well, if I may bring one of Melanie's own papers back and show it as somebody else plugging it for her. But this National Day of Prayer that's being called for the 16th of this month on Friday, I would encourage every Christian to get involved in a local meeting somewhere there. And it should be the monarch and the Prime Minister and the Archbishop of Canterbury are calling for this. They're not, but Voice for Justice and one or two others have, and so I'm very happy to jump on the bandwagon, as it were, because it's vital. We must pray for Liz as a woman, as a person who needs God in her own life. And we look in Scripture and we see that there were leaders, national leaders, who did not know God, were not part of God's people, but he still spoke to them. And so we can look to our God and Saviour that he would do the same for her. We can thank God that we don't have a globalist as our Prime Minister, that we have somebody who is a little bit more nationalistic, or in the right sense of the word, the non-pejorative sense of the word, and that he would aid her. And my prayer for her would be that God would give her the wisdom of Solomon and give her the strength to be able to carry that out as well. And I think if she appeals to the nation rather than appeals to a party, because she's got such a short window before the next election, she might, by God's grace, carry it.
Yeah,
She doesn't need 80 seats to come back. She only needs 20 odd or something like that.
That's true. That's true.
So she might.
And also, Melanie, I think that I don't have any. I mean, I can't speak for our viewers, but I don't have any expectations on her. So, I mean, for example, there was a big expectation on Theresa May to deliver Brexit. She did everything but deliver Brexit and tried to hinder it, and then put the Brexit negotiations in the hands of the into the hands of the Europeans, and was constantly trying to stop us getting an agreement with the EU. She was absolutely disastrous. I had great hopes for Boris that he would get Brexit done, which he did. He won a 80-seat plus majority in the House of Commons, got the Brexit agreement done, and after that everything kind of fell apart. So there isn't any expectation on Liz Truss, but also she must be aware that on average now our Prime Ministers since David Cameron resigned after losing the EU referendum referendum back in 2016, is that our Prime Ministers have only lasted 2 years since. So and also she's only got another 2 years before an election.
I think if she gets through the winter without people sort of not having enough food, if she gets through the winter and people have had food on the table and they haven't frozen, she'll be judged a success. On the other hand, I'm thinking that the international financial markets may not be kind to us. That's something else to pray about, because if, as Kwasi Kwarteng, who is mooted to be her chancellor, unless there's a surprise change, if he is to be believed, and I'm sure he is, because he's already said, it's been leaked that, or he's said openly that he's going to advocate some more quantitative easing to pay for the energy crisis. The pound has already gone down since she was announced as a leader slightly. It's levelled out a bit. But if we are going to borrow even more, then we might get punished on the financial markets, and then everything gets more expensive. So it's a very difficult path to tread, because you've got to make sure that people aren't going to riot, and you don't have the media saying, oh, so-and-so starved to death because of Liz Truss's policies. But on the other hand, if people are saying, well, I can't afford my new whatever it is because the pound's so weak.
No, absolutely. So the economic challenges faced are pretty grave. The high cost of living, the energy crisis, soaring inflation, social strikes from the public sector. It's not a great hand that she's been given. But what do you think are some of the strengths that she can actually play in terms of averting some of these major crises? And of course the biggest one is the cost of living, because with an 80% increase in energy prices come October, they're even talking in apocalyptic terms that maybe 45 million Brits will be in fuel poverty.
I think she has negotiated many trade deals that have benefited us, so that shows an ability. And while she's not particularly good in front of the camera, and various comments have been made about that, I think that shows a bit of substance to be able to address problems. And if she's got people like Kemi Badenoch in the cabinet and John Redwood, they're people who will look at problems and how to solve them. And that's what we need. And I think she's got enough character to do that, to work at things. I mean, Theresa May's one strength was that she did work hard. And she did have an attention to detail, maybe too far, to the sort of chagrin of her colleagues. But I think she could then look at the issues, Liz Truss could look at the issues and bring some pragmatic solutions to bear if she can withstand the pressures of the media and her party.
Which is a big challenge, isn't it? So when we look, she only won a kind of 37% of the vote within the Conservative Party. She won by 21,000 votes. But there wasn't much difference between her, for example, and Rishi Sunak, her main challenger. So we already see from that position she doesn't have the full support of the party, does she?
Well, no, and the MPs were in favour of Rishi Sunak, and apparently Sir John Major suggested that they should, the MP should have the vote. Well, I'm quite glad that they didn't, actually, because we've been playing that basically the Liz Truss, would be, as the least worst, would actually win. We're saying, Lord, the leader that you want. Yes, she's had to sort of try and during the campaign, put distance between herself and Rishi Sunak. That's why she's come up with a slightly outlandish policy about giving all the students an Oxbridge interview. They've got 3 A stars. She's got one of the biggest challenges is the levelling up, and this is what the Telegraph was pointing out last Saturday, that she's got to level up to retain the 28 seats the Tories won from Labour, because the Tories like a winner. They're not so bothered about character as with Boris Johnson if they're a winner. And so at the same time, she's got to keep an eye on, campaigning. I remember in Blair's government, they were always in campaigning mode. So she's got to juggle that as well. And she's already been advised to get different wings of the party into her cabinet. So she, as Mark says, she's going to need the wisdom of Solomon.
No, absolutely. But also one good thing, she's been described as a very good friend of Israel. The Jewish community are very pleased here that she is the Prime Minister. The Israeli Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, has a good relationship with her as well. So in terms of British-Israeli relations, we know that commands a blessing. If we look at Genesis 12, 1-3, I will bless those who bless you and I'll curse those who curse you. That's a good start.
Absolutely, and we want to encourage that. We're thankful for that. May all of the church be the same and same mind to bless Israel and to look out for their welfare. And as a nation, we have been up and down on this, and the church as well has been up and down on this. But that's an encouraging thing, and that surely will bring something of God's grace, God's favour on her premiership and hopefully over this nation.
Melanie, within 30 seconds, how can our viewers attend the National Day of Prayer that you are advertising on the front page of your newspaper?
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Well, if they go to the Voice for Justice site, vfjuk.org, they will find some prayer points. It's not something which is taking place in a big central venue. It's something people have to organise themselves. Mark's hired a local church hall that's going to be open to people across Sussex, and they can inquire via Heart newspaper, but ask your pastor or minister if you can have a room at the church at least for prayer.
Absolutely. So Melanie and Mark, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Today, which has been a historic week, as we have a new Prime Minister in place in Liz Truss. It does look like it's mission impossible, but with God nothing is impossible. So we need to pray for her, we need to pray for her protection, we need to pray that she would have wisdom, but also that she would have the strength to govern in the best interests of this country rather than governing in the interests of these global elites. That way there might be hope for our country, but also we need God to intervene massively. And so I want to thank you so much for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.